Transformers. They turn into cars. I bet you don't turn into a car, and that's why Transformers are cooler than you are. Bumblebee, in particular, turns into a yellow Camaro. Do you turn into a yellow Camaro? Once again, unlikely. Fun fact, there's multiple Bumblebees. Most Transformers shows and movies take place in their own universes, with distinct creative teams who have been free to interpret the characters in their own ways, and some of these interpretations are famously better than others. Last September, I was trying to make a photorealistic AI interpretation of Bumblebee from the show Robots in Disguise 2015. It didn't really work out, but in scrolling for reference photos, I discovered this. A singular JPEG with 3 Bumblebees on it, which I clicked on immediately out of sheer excitement for the large volume of Bumblebees on the one JPEG. This took me to a Screen Rant article called Every Version of Bumblebee Ranked. Now, I don't normally read Screen Rant articles, but as a massive fan of Transformers Animated, the hit show from 2007, I was curious to see where TFA Bumblebee would land on it.
Okay, this is not the way it's supposed to go.
So I waddled over to Twitter. We held a little funeral for Bee's placement here. It was good. Even the article's author joined in. Now we've met in person. She's cool. There were some Twitter users who went full anime villain, irate that someone on the internet had a different opinion than them. Of course, that behavior is ridiculous. Except for when I do it, I'm irate that Maddie Cohen from Screen Rant has a different opinion than me. Like, it's good. It's a solid opinion, it's just it could be better if absolutely everything about it were completely and fundamentally different. And so that's what we're gonna do. Kian Carlisle presents Top 10 Bumblebees, every version of Bumblebee, list of Bumblebees. Inspired by Screen Rant's Every Bumblebee Ranked list, but better in every way. Number 10, TFA Bumblebee. No, that's a joke. That was a joke. I've counted off 13 major incarnations of Bumblebee worth paying attention to, and I'll explain my reasoning a little bit more, but number 13 is gonna be Bayverse Bumblebee.
Okay.
We're gonna start this list with the biggest outlier by far, which is Michael Bay's take on Bumblebee. Bumblebee, across the Transformers franchise, is known for being youthful, kind, and caring, and relentlessly optimistic. All of this characterized in Bob Budiansky's original bio for the character back in 1984. However, most casual audiences have never seen that side of him because they've only seen this.
Next time you shoot somebody, don't go near them till you're sure they're dead.
I'll burn you so bad you'll wish you died as a child.
You see, there's a fundamental disconnect between what I want in Bumblebee and what Michael Bay wants. And that difference is that I want Bumblebee to be a character. Michael Bay treats the Transformers like monster movies, and he sees the Transformers as the monsters. Autobot, Decepticon, it doesn't really matter to him, he mainly just sees them as a destructive force of nature on a similar level to a flood or a hurricane, literally telling the Transformers voice actors to do whatever the hell they want, because he doesn't particularly care what the dialogue is or what the robots' personalities are.
He'll go, right, let's have some fun, right? and he'll do that, and he'll direct it. And it's we have a laugh and have a giggle, and that's how the characters develop, and people can relax and do it.
But Transformers has been, from the very beginning, a franchise driven by its characters and their personalities. In the original cartoon, the voice actor's energy is what made Transformers stand out amidst all the near-identical shows of that era. And Dan Gilvezan's performance as Bumblebee is what made that character stick in the pop culture zeitgeist as much as he has. Generally, a Transformers alt mode should be somewhat representative of their personality. A cute and round love bug worked perfectly for Bee. Meanwhile, an aggressive muscle car does match Bay's psychotic version, but Bay's version shouldn't have been a one-note psychopath. Transformers needs to reinvent itself and its characters to stay relevant, and there are plenty of ways to do that which aren't complete character assassinations. A prime example being TFA's interpretation of Optimus Prime, who's in over his head and socially awkward. Animated Prime would never say a line like this.
It is paramount that we recover the final 4 Iacon relics, the Omega Keys.
And traditional Prime would never say a line like this.
Sorry, I think we should run out and get you some human fuel. Yes, what say we go to the Burger Bot.
Their energy and their tone are completely different, and they're very clearly different characters. But TFA Prime still works as a faithful adaptation because his core traits are maintained. A noble leader who often lets his doubts get in the way of achieving his true potential, endlessly caring but stern if he has to be. Willing to protect the humans at all costs even if he's a bit confused by them. If you take Bee's base traits of kind and optimistic, there are countless rich and distinct characters from across pop culture that could be taken as a basis for a new interpretation of Bumblebee. But Michael Bay's Bumblebee doesn't work as an adaptation because it doesn't have a single trait in common with the original outside of being a yellow car and the human's friend. It's still kind of iconic and nostalgic, his mask looks cool, I don't hate this design, but it's far in between my least favorite interpretation of the character because it's not a character at all. Number 12. Dreamwave Bumblebee. Transformers has had comics running for the majority of its existence. Marvel Comics held the license until the mid-90s. Then new Transformers stories stopped appearing on the shelves. However, in 2001, Hasbro formed a partnership with the relatively unknown publisher Dreamwave Productions, who began telling a new Transformers storyline heavily based on the original G1 cartoon. This is likely the least significant and least iconic Bumblebee out of anything on this list because he didn't really do anything. He mostly just appeared in crowd shots with the other Autobots and would occasionally have dialogue that sounded vaguely kinda like the stuff Bumblebee would say in the show, but wasn't really character motivated. He didn't have arcs or journeys, he never came into his own, he was just sort of there, and part of that surely because Dreamwave went bankrupt in a truly spectacular fashion in early 2005. Abruptly ending the continuity and universe. At the end of the day, Dreamwave Bee isn't really good or bad, he's just a stock Bumblebee. Number 11. The Netflix War for Cybertron trilogy Bumblebee. The War for Cybertron trilogy's version of Bee is interesting. In Siege, he's angry, violent, and pessimistic.
I took a job, and the job's done. Pay me, and I'll be on my way.
Then, he has Alpha Trion protocols installed in his brain, and he literally downloads all of his character development over the course of 5 seconds. Then, in Earthrise, he's genuinely a great version of Bumblebee who supports Prime, calls him out when he needs to.
You did what you thought was best at the time.
And then in Kingdom, he doesn't really do anything, and I forgot he's there. He yells at Optimus once in the finale, that's it.
Now let me do my job and help you carry the weight.
First off, great voice actor, Joe Zisha. I don't think he was given great material, but if you turn off your brain and just listen to the performance, he nails the way Bumblebee speaks, and he stands out very strongly against the other performances in that series. So let's talk about the good, all of which can be found in Earthrise and Kingdom. And despite watching these within the last year, I don't really remember what I liked about him. I had to go re-watch them to remember. He's there to comfort and support everyone around him, but also call Prime out when he's making morally questionable decisions. This version of Prime really needs to be called out. However, there's only one instance of each, and they come across as rather uninspired retreads of better moments where he does the same thing in other media. The notion of Bumblebee starting as a selfish, terrible person and evolving into a good person is a fantastic idea, and I really give the writers credit for what they attempted to do. I'm not opposed to Bee doing questionable things, and you'll see that there are versions of him ranked ahead which do quite awful things. But it's all about the character writing. Bee's entire character arc was downloaded into his head, and the end result is a Bumblebee with a lot that works but just gives a sense of whiplash when watching the show. The writing for Bumblebee, much like the trilogy as a whole, felt messy and incomplete. Number 10, Nightverse Bumblebee. The next Bumblebee on this list is from the film Bumblebee, which is what happens when Paramount watches Transformers 5 bomb domestically and then completely rebounds in the opposite direction by making him cute, bubbly, and adorable. Now, is Nightverse Bumblebee in the same continuity as Bayverse? We don't know. They've been so wishy-washy about it. They're listed on the same wiki page, but that just means they're part of the same general continuity family. For example, Dreamwave and IDWB are both on the G1 Bumblebee page, despite clearly not coexisting with the 80s cartoon or comic. It was originally intended to be in continuity with Bay's movies, but after a focus group audience complained, they rewrote the movie to start on Cybertron, which made it not at all in continuity with the Bay movies, but on the other hand, the Bay movies weren't in continuity with themselves.
Optimus, I would lay down my life for you.
Bumblebee. Your voice. I have not heard it since Cybertron fell.
Permission to speak, sir.
Permission granted, old friend.
You speak now?
The task was daunting. Like, how are you going to find that voice? Bay told MTV News.
Bumblebee's voice actor from the first movie literally played characters in this one. Michael, how did you forget? So, Travis Knight Bumblebee, he didn't quite click with me, and it's because he feels like two completely different characters inhabiting the same body. We simultaneously see him function as a lethal and cutthroat warrior, and as a bumbling toddler. I think the film's explanation is that his memory loss caused him to revert to a childlike state, but I don't think that explanation works. He doesn't get his memories back between the house scene and the climax. He has one memory return, and it's before he wrecks the house. In making him as different from Bay's Bumblebee as possible, they stripped away all of that character's competence, leaving us with a Bumblebee with the mind of a 2-year-old for the majority of the movie. And I think this is the youngest Bumblebee's ever acted across the franchise, to the best of my knowledge. I think the family dog is more emotionally mature than Bumblebee in this movie, and I'm not necessarily a fan. Bumblebee was a very simple movie, and I think Charlie was definitely the protagonist. Bumblebee was more so just a cute sidekick. The writers were trying to do something all epic and fancy with War for Cybertron Bumblebee. It didn't work out, whereas the creative team behind the Knightverse Bumblebee really wasn't trying to do much of anything, but he kind of does work, at least for the movie. It's a version of the character that reaches none of Bumblebee's real highs, but doesn't reach any of his lows either. I think their main goal was just to make him as different from Bay's movie's version as possible, but they weren't particularly interested in defining who he is. And that's fine, but it doesn't leave me with a version of the character that I'm completely enamored with.
You think these little chains can hold up?
Our next entry is from the Aligned Continuity, and before we dive in, I'd just like to clarify that I am counting War for Cybertron Game Bumblebee, Prime Bumblebee, and Robots in Disguise 2015 Bumblebee as 3 separate entities. Just like the Screen Rant article, I strongly agree with Maddie in the sense that they are technically the same character, but like, are they? All 3 of them had completely different creative teams and their own vastly different, often irreconcilable takes on the character. They created and developed these incarnations independently of each other. From a creator's perspective, these are 3 different incarnations of Bumblebee, and I will count them as such. Number 9, Robots in Disguise 2015 Bumblebee. Also his little cameos in Rescue Bots Season 4. This show sees Bumblebee struggling to lead a team of younger bots on Earth while rounding up rogue Decepticon prisoners in the aftermath of Transformers Prime.
Let's rev up and roll out.
And while this seems like a natural formula for growth, RID doesn't take much advantage of this. There's an episode early on where he keeps asking himself, what would Optimus do? But eventually comes to realize that he's not Optimus, he's his own person. That's great, but unfortunately there isn't much else like this in the show. It tended to grind its wheels and tell the same stories over and over without the charm or appeal that makes other repetitive Transformers shows enjoyable. Bee's depiction in Robots in Disguise 2015 sort of follows the trajectory of the show overall. He's perfectly fine at first, although repetitive. He has good moments, like the show has good ideas and designs. This guy's a crab! This guy's a snake! He's a train who turned into a snake! But by season 2, the show was kind of a corpse. Nothing new or interesting happened. Bumblebee had the same struggles and lessons in every episode, and at times would be more reckless or impatient than the people he led. Granted, I haven't watched this show since middle school, but I don't think my memory is inaccurate. In Season 2's finale, he's actively jealous of and angry at Optimus for being a better leader than him, and refuses to work with him when the Earth is in danger.
Let them take us prisoner so that...
I didn't ask for alternative plans.
Collect the minicons!
No, we have to keep moving!
We cannot leave them here to...
Stop treating me like Optimus! Bumblebee!
This is why I'm counting him as his own character, because this is not the Bee we saw in the preceding aligned continuity media. It comes across as extremely childish, and if they had written him to be more childlike, it might have been fine, but he's depicted as an adult. Specifically an adult we'd seen in 2 video games and a show before. And seeing an adult act like a bratty child isn't typically too enjoyable to watch. Not the best, not terrible. Going forward, however, I think that every version we'll talk about is an overwhelmingly good depiction of Bumblebee, so let's dive into those. Number 8. The War for Cybertron video game Bumblebee. Because Hasbro likes to reuse terms and phrases they've trademarked, there are 2 War for Cybertrons with 2 different Bumblebees, because Hasbro is insistent on preventing any potential new fans from understanding what's going on. This is Bumblebee from the War for Cybertron video game and Fall of Cybertron video game. This character is a faithful reincarnation of his Generation 1 self. He's upbeat, optimistic, loyal, even taking a near-fatal blow for Optimus, though he's mostly present on the campaign to spout quips during the mission.
Megatron's not messing around!
He's not super high up on this list because we don't see much of his caring side or really explore his personality. I don't think that's a criticism. The goal of the War for Cybertron games was to create an engaging third-person shooter action game, and that's exactly what they did. Bumblebee did not need to be a deep character for the game to work. The creators knew what they were doing. There's not much to say about him, that's because there's not really anything to criticize. He works. Number 7. Prime Bumblebee. Also his little cameos in Rescue Bots Season 1 and 2. After the first Michael Bay movie performed well, Hasbro wanted to capitalize on that with the next animated series that went into production. Multiple ideas were pitched around, including a show with Derek Wyatt again, but ultimately Transformers Prime was settled on. This version of Bumblebee was once again a muscle car with a damaged voice box, but rather than speaking in radio clips, he used a series of R2-D2 style beeps. In fact, Bumblebee's entire personality in this show is almost synonymous with R2-D2, and it works weirdly well, because when you think about it, R2-D2 embodies all the traits that Bob Budiansky wrote in his original profile. Replace Bumblebee with R2-D2 and read it again, it works! Like Night vs. Bee, he's both an immature goofball and a competent fighter, but they don't clash. When Bumblebee fights in this show, he's just goofy and cute, not a lethal killer. It comes across more so as feistiness, like R2. This is a really inspired choice, and it's effective. However, effective is all I can really call it. Viewers get attached to R2-D2 in the same way they get attached to a dog in a movie. Like Winn-Dixie's cute and all, but no one's really tripping over the complex emotional journey of Winn-Dixie.
Winn-Dixie's better at making friends than anyone.
Cicely Tyson.
He sure loves peanut butter.
Bumblebee's really just a sidekick in Prime. He's by far the least developed member of that cast. He led very few episodes. Now, out of all that which I just said, I don't think that's a bad thing. Just an observation. They knew what they were doing with this Bee. He doesn't have any major issues. I just like the next 6 more. What this one truly has over the others, though, is one of the most deeply satisfying moments from the entire Transformers franchise, when he regains his voice in the series finale and kills Megatron.
You took my voice. You will never rob anyone of anything ever again.
Woo! Yeah, baby!
Number 6. Animated Bumblebee. And now is the part of the show where I defend TFA Bumblebee from the heartless and vindictive smear campaign waged by Maddie Cohen from ScreenRant.com. The heart of her argument stemmed from the fact that the role of Bumblebee was originally written for the rebellious teenager Hotshot. For context, Bumblebee had been almost completely irrelevant for the last 20 years, and we just emerged from a 6-year window where Hotshot was the second most important Transformer behind Optimus Prime. And Transformers Animated was naturally going to include him in the main cast. Story editor Marty Eisenberg crafted a layered team dynamic that would work with 5 distinct personalities, but a ways into production, executive producer Sam Register suggested that Bumblebee replace Hotshot in the lineup after the success of the live-action movie. Ratchet also replaced Red Alert. With a solid team dynamic already fleshed out, there was no sense in discarding it, so Hotshot and Red Alert's personalities were simply applied to Bumblebee and Ratchet, making Bee a rebellious teenager for the first time. He's a daredevil, he's a bit sneaky, and while it's clearly quite different from his traditional portrayal, I think it works incredibly well, and that's because, at their core, Hotshot and Bumblebee aren't too different. Despite the teenage angst layered on the performance, this is truly Bumblebee at the end of the day. Brave to a point of stupidity.
Know what? You're even uglier from this angle.
Wisecracking at unwarranted situations.
He's stuck in park for good. Oh, and he's got a flat, too.
And willing to sacrifice for his teammates at all costs. Taking a near-lethal blast for Sorry in only the 3rd episode.
Sorry!
Bumblebee!
He snaps at Prime and gets out of line, but it's always in defense of Sorry, or in the name of what he considers the greater good. It's not like RID 2015 Bumblebee getting mad at Optimus for just existing, basically. I understand that he's a bit whiny and his ego can become obnoxious. Famous YouTuber Road Russell, formerly Markscaper, says that this is very much a love him or hate him character, and I respectfully agreed with him. Ironically, as a kid, I found him extremely cringe and annoying, but as I grew older, I became self-aware enough to relate to that. Bumper Robinson's performance is essential to TFAB working, because he plays up the comedy of his lines rather than the annoyingness. This Bee's obviously an outlier, but he works very well, and watching him grow up over the course of the series is very satisfying, even if we never got a formal conclusion to his journey. The fact that he works as a faithful adaptation is almost entirely coincidental, as Hotshot just happened to possess Bumblebee's base qualities, but I'm glad it happened. After Dreamwave collapsed, IDW quickly claimed the Transformers license and launched a new continuity in September of 2005, which actually ran to August of 2018, before IDW rebooted it a few months later. For a comic book continuity that ran 13 years, there are a lot of inconsistencies, as different artists and creators took hold of the character. For example, in Infiltration, Bee is fully willing to sacrifice a few human lives, whereas in the Transformers ongoing, Bee is repulsed that Jazz killed a human and it permanently severs their relationship. If you look at the broad strokes of the continuity and look at how Bee was generally depicted in the stories, you'll see two distinct incarnations. 2014's Dark Cybertron event proves to be a massive turning point for his character, and his appearances written after 2014 are completely different than those before. As such, I will break IDW in half and count the first half of IDW as one character and the second half as another character, within the context of this list. Number 5 is the IDW Comics Bumblebee from before Dark Cybertron. Remembered for constantly changing designs multiple times per year, IDW Bumblebee played a major and prominent role throughout the continuity. Over the first few years, his characterization flip-flops quite a bit. He's more grim and serious in the darker stories, and more fun and upbeat in the brighter ones. Luckily, things changed formally in 2012. After the war came to a close, IDW released a one-shot comic called The Death of Optimus Prime, which saw Prime come to realize that Cybertron simply no longer needs him. He then left one half of the destroyed Matrix with Rodimus, and one half with Bumblebee. This set up two concurrent ongoings, Robots in Disguise and More Than Meets the Eye. Get it? Robots in Disguise, written by John Barber, combined all of the loose threads of previous stories and retroactively made Bumblebee feel like a singular, consistent character. My friend Alex describes IDW Bumblebee as RID 2015 Bee but good, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. This continuity once again puts Bumblebee in a leadership position, but his character development sticks and his mistakes have consequences. Tasked with overseeing the reconstruction of society after the end of the war, Bumblebee is out of his element and doubting himself, and going back and forth on whether or not the Decepticons deserve forgiveness or deserve to be trusted. He comes across as a Bumblebee who's been through a lot more, and is much older and misses who he used to be. Misses when he was able to look at the world with the delightful simplicity that we're used to from Bumblebee. Everything comes to a head in the Dark Cybertron crossover event, when Bumblebee, after convincing Galvatron not to murder Megatron, is in turn himself shot by Galvatron, abruptly ending his life when readers least expected it. His sacrifice ultimately convincing Megatron to wield Bumblebee's insignia and become an Autobot for good. Bumblebee lost his life trying to end conflict with words and inspiring others to do the right thing, arguably the two traits that define every great iteration of this character. Of course, this is Transformers, so Bumblebee didn't stay dead and was in fact a very different character upon his return, as you will see later. Number 4. Cyberverse, and his cameos in Rescue Bots Academy.
And I know it has something to do with the Allspark.
I think Jeremy Levy is my favorite voice for Bumblebee since the original. I think that he embodies the character perfectly. Cyberverse B isn't particularly complex. The show's 11-minute runtime blocked it from a lot of character arcs or nuance, so we see some of the general insecurity we often see from Bumblebee, but not much else. But the reason I love this Bumblebee is because he feels like the first true on-screen return to form since the original. He's competent, but he's relatable and out of his element sometimes. Also, look at this design. It's like they took design influences from just about every major version of the character. The car roof is the chest, like G1, you've got the vertical stripes, like Animated, door wings, like Bayverse, and muscle car mode, like Prime. B's design here, like much of Cyberverse, pays attention to all preceding 35 years of mythology, and pays tribute to it. It's not just the design, but the character as well. You see, via the show's flashback setup, which spanned millions of years, Cyberverse could simultaneously show B with a natural voice,
just taking a walk, that way,
the R2-D2 style beeps, and with a radio voice,
and that's not all! Behold, the power of whatever this is.
How dare this show for children have jokes for children! Now, the radio voice wasn't great, and even when I interviewed Randolph Hurd, the show's head writer, he admitted that it didn't come out the way he wanted, and that's why they ditched it after season 1. Thankfully, they did. That boosted this Bumblebee up several spots.
The huge controversy for us, which we had to navigate around ridiculously, was B's voice box. We got into Cyberverse for season 1, and we were told, oh yeah, B can't talk, B can't talk. Right? There's 2 characters in the show.
But even in season 1, several flashbacks where B had his voice showed a great reverence for and captured the spirit of the character incredibly well.
I've located Optimus. I'm gonna try something. I don't think it's gonna work. Yep, probably won't work. Wish me luck.
And this direction was completely leaned into for the preceding seasons, which was exactly what I wanted to happen. So that's neat. This B is neat. He may live. Number 3. Generation 1 Bumblebee. For this listing, I am counting the cartoon, and both the US and UK Marvel comics. They're all different continuities, but they all depict Bumblebee nearly identically, directly based on Bob Budiansky's outlines. So we have a reverse of the aligned continuity here, with 3 separate continuities being counted as one character. Most smaller versions of him, from generically branded Transformers media, games, and merchandise, are directly rooted in this Generation 1B as well. What can I say about him that he doesn't communicate for himself? He's the original that inspired, sometimes loosely, every other incarnation on this list in terms of attitude, story role, and design. His friendly nature meshed with the humans well, and he formed relationships with them immediately. Being Prime Scout, he and the humans would constantly go on adventures together. And in being these humans' introduction to the world of the Transformers, he was the audience's as well.
Come on, let's go inside. I've never seen anything like this.
Dan Gilvezan absolutely defined this character as a young adult who can hold his own, but is still lighthearted and accessible to pretty much anyone. It's wonderful, and there's frankly not much I can say about him that hasn't already been said about the most documented version of the character. His personality and his Volkswagen Beetle alt mode are prominent icons in pop culture, to the point where people who know absolutely nothing about Transformers know who this character is. I would like you to name as many Transformers off the top of your head as you can.
Bumblebee! Oh my god! The word is spot on smooth.
Yo, Optimus Prime?
That's
No,
more than
that's
one
cheap.
word.
Number 2. IDW 2019 Bumblebee. The next Bumblebee is from the ongoing IDW Comics continuity that started in 2019, after IDW's first continuity ended in 2018. This is the only Bumblebee we're discussing who hails from an active, ongoing continuity, and they're actually doing something very unique and different with him. IDW 2 starts on a pre-war Cybertron as growing political turmoil begins to overtake the planet. We're introduced to a version of Bumblebee who's exactly what you'd expect. Youthful, optimistic, energetic, but mature. He's assigned to mentor a newly forged young bot named Rubble. After teaching him about their dangerous world and coming to care for Rubble, Bee becomes very concerned about his protection, and flirts with the idea of joining the Ascenticons, the precursor to the Decepticons. We are essentially seeing Bumblebee consider becoming a Decepticon, but we fully understand where he's coming from. At this point in the story, the Ascenticons aren't cartoonishly evil villains. The threat and danger they pose might not be immediately noticeable if you're distracted by the promise of security. When Bumblebee speaks to Soundwave, Rubble, now left alone, is attacked and beaten to death by the hitman Quake. With his protege dead, Bumblebee blames himself and goes on a rage-fueled quest for vengeance, ultimately impaling and dismantling Quake. However, unlike the Bay movies, we understand where he's coming from. We've seen what he's lost, his anger stems from self-loathing. An angry, murderous Bumblebee is not the direction where I would go with the character necessarily, but they are doing an incredible job in justifying the choice. What we are watching unfold in IDW 2019 is a Bumblebee fall from grace story, and he's currently working on pulling himself back up. Currently, Bee's on the run and has joined Swindle and a group of mercenaries. However, when he's given the opportunity to kill Barricade, another bot complicit in Rubble's murder, he gives into his conscience and spares him, and he decided to report some vital intel to Optimus Prime. Returning to Cybertron later in the run, Optimus formally apologizes to Bee for the stress he put on him in the name of the greater good, and Bumblebee says he's already forgiven him. We've watched Bumblebee completely lose himself and find himself again. IDW's second continuity has combined Generation 1 and Bayverse Bumblebee into one coherent, consistent character. Unfortunately, IDW will lose the Transformers license soon, as a company called Skybound has purchased it and will begin operating with it in 2023. So while we have very little left to see from this Bumblebee, I feel confident that they're going to stick the landing with him. Number 1. Jerry Seinfeld from the Bee Movie.
You like jazz?
Number 0. IDW Bumblebee after Dark Cybertron. My all-time favorite depiction of Bumblebee hails from the world of IDW Comics after his death in the Dark Cybertron storyline, where his characterization drastically changed from the first half of the continuity, in, I feel at least, a pretty organic way, once again written by John Barber. So let's set the scene. After Dark Cybertron, More Than Meets the Eye and Robots in Disguise continue, although Robots in Disguise was rebranded to the Transformers Volume 2 because a show was using the name Robots in Disguise now. A third storyline popped up after this crossover, although it wasn't ongoing. It was several miniseries called Windblade, written by Margaret Scott and showcasing the then brand new character for the first time. As Robots in Disguise, the Transformers Volume 2, continued, Starscream had become the ruler of Cybertron, a conniving and corrupt dictator. Bumblebee began appearing before Starscream, calling him out on his behavior. Was he real, or was he a hallucination brought about by Starscream's self-doubt? The story left it ambiguous. Soon, the Transformers rebranded to Optimus Prime, bringing him back into the fold after being largely absent for the last 3 years following his departure, and focusing on his adventures off-world. As such, it was up to Margaret Scott to continue the social-political storylines on Cybertron in her limited series Till All Are One. And this is what landed Bee the number 1 spot. He continues calling Starscream out on his behavior and nudging Starscream towards making the right choices. Starscream and Bumblebee have been 2 of the most prominent characters in the whole franchise since the beginning, but they've never really had truly meaningful interactions up until this point. They were paired together for a storyline, in a way that brilliantly took full advantage of who they both are and used them as foils for each other. After Starscream refuses to help Windblade when the stakes are high, Bumblebee angrily demands to know why Starscream always pushes everyone out of his life, only for Starscream to retort that every time he's allowed people in, he's been severely hurt. He demands that Bumblebee leave him alone if he's truly outraged by what Starscream did. And Bumblebee does. leaving Starscream alone to reflect on who he is and what he's become. Starscream, affected by guilt, listens to Bumblebee's advice and confesses his crimes and sins in front of Cybertron, surrendering an election and allowing himself to be apprehended, giving the throne to Windblade. And, once in his cell, Bumblebee returns to comfort him and be the necessary emotional support. In my opinion, this is the single greatest use of both Bumblebee and Starscream in all Transformers fictions. The art by Sarah, I apologize, I know this is probably mispronounced, Petre Durocher, tells the story phenomenally better than the standard blocky look would, and Margaret Scott understands and challenges these characters in a more impressive manner than most of what I've seen from Transformers stories. After Till All Are One, IDW would tell stories of Bumblebee before and during the war, essentially being like, see guys, this was his personality all along. In the Transformers vs. ROM mini-series, Bumblebee discovers an Energon synthesizer on an organic world, and even though he knows how desperately the Autobots need it, he opts to destroy and hide it in order to protect the species from the chaos and destruction that would ensue if their war reached their world. Pre-war, he's shocked by Orion Pax slipping into brutal tactics and actually goes out of his way to stop Pax from beating Swindle to death. At the very end of the continuity, when IDW1 was wrapping up ahead of its reboot in 2019, Optimus Prime entered a physical realm called Infraspace, and there he found Bumblebee, ultimately managed to bring Bee back into the real world with a physical form, where he aids Optimus Prime in the final battle against Unicron, a battle which Starscream sacrifices his life to win. And when all is said and done, all the Cybertronians settle on their new home planet of Earth. Bee is visited by a friend, Starscream's spirit, who will stand by his side the way Bumblebee stood by his. Bumblebee is there to hold his friends accountable, inspire them when they're down, and encourage them to become the best versions of themselves. When Optimus begins to doubt himself and his mission, Bumblebee is the light in Prime's darkest hour. That's who Bumblebee is to me. And the final years of IDW1 absolutely embody that. And that's it. Type your lists in the comments below. Are yours the same as mine, or do yours have some slight variation? If so, your opinion is wrong and you should be ashamed of yourself.
You should be ashamed of yourself!
We'll get a new Bumblebee soon with Earthspark. Skybound's sure to have a Bumblebee. I bet there's 4 or 5 Bumblebees in production somewhere at Hasbro that haven't been announced yet. So here's to 100 million more Bumblebees. Yay, Bumblebee! That's the end of the video. At the time of this upload, my Mighty Med retrospective video has been done for over a week, but I have not been able to get past copyright. I've done videos about Zack and Cody, Hannah Montana, That's So Raven, Lab Rat, perfectly fine, not a lick of trouble at any point, but apparently Mighty Med is what prompts Walt Disney himself to crawl his way out of his grave to enforce his IP. It's currently in dispute, though I'm not sure how long it'll take to get everything resolved. So I just quickly repackaged and repurposed a video from my Transformers specific channel to upload onto this main one to fill the gap. At the suggestion of Jonathan from the YouTube channel Second Dimension. He's the smartest man in America. We love him. If you like Transformers, go to that one! That one's so cool, it's been a dead channel for over a year. That's the end of the video.
You're making the mistake of interacting with screen-rent content. This, you must never do. They are the literal shit on the shoe of the internet, and the click merchants who vomit their garbage into the world will be the first against the wall when the revolution comes. I would not piss on them if they were on fire. They make life worse by breathing. There genuinely are not words for the depth and breadth of my contempt for these people. I genuinely hope they hate what they do and stagger through life on inertia and pills, every article taking a further day off their lives. They deserve nothing and nobody.
That's the end of the video.